thanks for contacting us. We'll get back to you when we can. Most of their female candidates said no because they had an all-male slate of interviewers.
I love this story. 14 seconds. How do I know? Because I tested this.
It doesn't take long to go to Glassdoor and see that no one wants to work at your company.
Takes 3 little clicks on Glassdoor and a couple other sites. During a job search, there are 2 things that can frustrate candidates more than anything else. The first is finding a job on a job board, clicking on the apply link, filling out all the information that they're asking for, only to be forwarded to the real application on the company's website where you have to fill it out all again. And secondly, submitting a resume and getting the obligatory, oh yeah, we got your resume notifications, and then never hearing from them again. Not even a rejection letter. Making a great first impression should be the highest priority in any company's recruiting process, which is part of making a great application experience. My guest today is the Chief Commercial Officer of Jobsync.io. With Jobsync, employers no longer need to have candidates click off of job boards to provide a complete application directly into their ATS. And its easier application process has been proven to reduce cost per applicant and time to hire by keeping candidates on the career website. Please welcome to the show, Leah Daniels.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so currently you're over at Jobsync.io. Why don't you give me a quick 30 seconds about what Jobsync does? I know I kind of gave it in the intro, but you do a much better job of it.
It's trying to solve what I think is a very real problem that exists in the US market today, right? Companies need candidates. We all know that. That problem has persisted forever. And you have 2 choices. It's almost like the Goldilocks situation. You can go and use the easy applies, get lots and lots of candidates. Some of them are qualified, some of them are not. Or you can send them to your website. You can apply through your career site. There's a login. You lose 95% of your traffic. There's a lot of tiers that are involved in that because you're not getting the candidates you want, but the ones you get tend to be more qualified. And JobSync is looking at this saying, wow, actually, why don't we just make it the best of both worlds? Give the easy apply experience right on your job boards, your Indeeds, your Facebooks, your ZipRecruiters, but take those job level questions out of the ATS and put them into the easy apply experience. And so what do you end up with? That volume you're looking for, but also with the questions answered, screening out some candidates, but more importantly, giving your recruiters the tools they need to save time going through those candidates. Yes, this one's qualified, no, this one's not. And so
let's
trying to solve a problem there.
Let's back this up a little bit, because I know that most recruiters, most VPs of talent acquisition, directors of TA, employer branding, they've never gone through their own applicant tracking system, right? They've never gone through an apply sequence. And if they did, they went through it by just going to the website, and then they find his job. I'm just going to hack away and apply to this job, right? That's not the real candidate experience. That's not how 90% of your candidates are going to find you. Most candidates are going to find you by either a post on social media, a post on a job board, something like that, right? Or a recruiter is going to reach out to them. So let's kind of break down that candidate experience right from the beginning. So they find a job on the job board. That's one pathway. Find a job on the job board. They click that button. What happens?
Yep. So one of 2 things happens, depending upon how you set it up. You can either have your candidates go through an experience on that job site, never leaving the job site. They answer the standard questions, they upload a resume, or they don't, whatever you like. And then you get that candidate either in your ATS or as an email that you can then react to. Or
so you're on Indeed.
Yeah.
You click on the candidate. I'm candidate A. I go to Indeed. I click on the apply link. I fill out the form inside of Indeed, and then Indeed will email my information or push it over into the ATS for that recruiter to pick up either in their email or in their ATS.
Yep.
So everything
and that's
was
the entire
done
experience for a candidate.
Right. Everything was done on Indeed, right? So I uploaded my resume on Indeed. I filled out the application on Indeed. I answered any questions, any assessments. All that was done on Indeed.
Correct. So another option is that the candidate can see the apply on company website. So they click on it, they shift over to your website, are greeted with a another opportunity to hit the button apply, and then they are greeted with a fill in your username and password or create one, and then all the questions enter the application process. But there's another set of things that are different about those two scenarios that are important to remember. Indeed favors companies who use their easy apply. So does ZipRecruiter. And so if you want to unlock more of the mobile traffic, which we know is about 70% of the traffic, you really do need to turn on that easy apply button. But the trade-off, as we know, is the recruiter experience of having lots and lots of candidates who are not qualified. So
you're kind of, do you want a lot of traffic? Do you want a higher quality traffic? Because on the flip side, I think you broke up on this part, but when you send it directly to the company apply page, there is a huge drop off. In fact, most companies, when it drives directly into the ATS, they have somewhere between only a 3 to 5% capture rate. In other words, 95 to 97%, 98%, wherever that math is, 95 to 97% of the candidates that go there never apply to the job.
Sure, exactly. So there's this huge loss in that transition where candidates are frustrated with the user and password experience, with the lack of mobile readiness of the ATS experience, of the 17 pages of optional questions that you might have. Lots of things weigh into that. If you think about it from your company's perspective and your budgeting perspective, you are paying for lots and lots of traffic that, I think you mentioned as we were talking that there's an 11% increase in your cost per click this year. So you're paying for this higher price point for less traffic you're now losing when you send over to your application experience. And that is problematic, right? It's not ideal. And it's a bad, experience for the candidate themselves. Like they're abandoning your process. They're telling you something. They don't want to engage in that process.
So let's kind of back up there because
Yep.
I hadn't released the 11.3% yet. We're having a little bit of internet issue, right? So in 2020, AppCast found that the overall cost per click rate increased by 11.3% in comparison to 2019 and by 12.9% in comparison to 2018. So you were mentioning some other statistics. Why don't you go ahead and reiterate those numbers there?
So one of the things that I was noticing recently is the number of people who are unemployed or available for employment versus the number of opening jobs, right? How many jobs are available to be filled in the US market? If we compare the 2019 pre-COVID levels to the 2020 2021 current levels, we're seeing a 22% increase in the number of openings, in the comparison, right? So it's a 1.21 jobs to available people in February of 2020 to 1.48 comparative of number of unemployed people to the number of job openings in October of 2021. So what does that tell us? It means everything everyone's talking about this idea of how do we get more candidates because there are no candidates is a real phenomenon happening. The data is suggesting that not only is this happening, it's getting worse. We're seeing those data points continue to increase in their spread, meaning we are going to see more and more companies struggle to find candidates for those open positions. So when you start to sort of dissect that around how do we fix this? Well, you can't fix the big problem, right? You can't fix the bear, it's coming. All you can do is run faster. So the idea here is how do you run faster than your competition? How do you get to those candidates before someone else does? And a big part of that is don't let them abandon you when you find them. Don't get them to say no, get them to say yes, right? If you're not focused on a yes, then you're not focused on the right thing with the candidate experience.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to fix a broken applicant tracking or applicant process is to capture as many as you can up front and then keep them engaged as much as possible throughout that entire recruiting process. When you have 97% of the candidates dropping off of applicant tracking systems or career websites because you have a horrible experience when they land there, the branding looks different, The messaging is horrible. There's only a text-based job description. There's no video explaining, what the job is about. There's no information from the hiring manager. There's no cultural details. There's no information about the day in the life of. As soon as you start losing candidates, what's the chance of them ever coming back?
Right. It's very little, right?
Yeah.
They've moved on. And we've done a really interesting thing over the last couple of decades. We've taught candidates, we being the recruiting industry, taught candidates that in order to get a job, you need to apply to lots of jobs, right? And so if they're abandoning yours, they're going to someone else, but they're actually going to lots of other organizations and they're applying to all of them. So what does that mean? So if you happen to be someone lucky enough to get them to say yes, your next step is really important. How fast can you engage with that candidate? Speed matters. With the candidate experience, I think as technologists, we've been really focused on the click, the conversion, the application process, but the candidate experience, to your point, is much wider. It starts earlier than we think it does, and it certainly ends a lot later. But that conversion window is important to focus on, and those moments after as well.
The newest talent board reports, I had Kevin Grossman on a couple of weeks ago, and he said that the number of times, the number of touch points that a candidate has with a brand or going through the application process before they apply is usually around 12 to 15 touch points before they apply, right? So that could be a recruiter reaching out to them on LinkedIn. It could be I ran across their ad. I ran across, some kind of employer branding thing. But 12 to 15 touch points before they apply, that's a lot, right? So
sounds like a sales metric, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it is
14,
absolutely
right. 12
it
to
aligns
14
perfectly
touch
with
points
the sales
before they'll ask for a demo, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of the same.
So the next part is once they apply, now they're ready to go. But how long does it take for that recruiter to even look at their resume, yet alone set up an interview or give that candidate a call? In most cases, it's not 24 hours or even 48 hours. In most cases, my guess is it's probably closer to a week to 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sort of lends to the bigger challenge, which is this isn't a technology problem, the candidate experience, right? This isn't anything more than a process challenge that companies have to lean into changing their process, their thinking. I was joking the other day that companies think that this is The Bachelor and they're handing out roses, right? And that all of the candidates want to work for them and want to work hard to work for them, and they're the only game in town. And that's just not the case anymore, right? The candidates have the roses and they're making choices. And depending upon the industry you're working in, there are less and less candidates to hand out roses to. So we have to start thinking about the candidate experience as something that we are salespeople selling our business and our opportunity, less than screeners and people trying to get rid of the opportunity for lots of people. That shift in mentality will force a change in the process and how we interact and engage with the candidates in the market.
So really your solution solves that one big problem of you're making it easier for candidates to apply because they don't have to apply in, 2 different places. All their information is kept in one area. And when they click button, everything gets transferred over.
Exactly. And so if they've already applied with an Indeed or a Zip before somewhere else, then it's just going through the job level questions that any given employer might have specific to that job.
Yeah, so that every company is going to have their own assessment questions and things like that.
As they should. And then from the recruiter experience, now that goes into their ATS, it goes in against the job. They're working out of the ATS. They're not having to work out of their inbox. So there's a separate component with Jobsync where we're focused on the recruiter experience as much as the candidate experience. I think one of the things that's happened in the market as we focus on candidate experience, it can be at the expense of the recruiter experience.
Yeah.
Which is ironic because that in turn makes a bad candidate experience, right? If we're not making the recruiters' lives easier in this process, especially as we're seeing more turnover, not more recruiters to do the job, but more job openings, less candidates. So their job just gets harder and harder. And if you're not optimizing their experience along the way, then you're not actually fixing the problem you're setting out to fix.
Attrition rates are going through the roof right now, right?
Yep.
So you've got what traditionally was most large organizations had somewhere between a 15 and 20, maybe 25% annual attrition rate. This is the number of candidates or number of employees that just turn over retirement. They
Yep.
leave the company, they go to another opportunity. Recently, though, since August, I think the annual attrition rate, the latest numbers I saw, some companies are seeing as high as 45%, 50% attrition rate.
Yeah.
What can companies do to kind of stem that loss?
Well, it's all tied together, right? It's back to your word, experience. It's candidate experience, it's recruiter experience, it's employee experience. You're watching what companies are doing. They're offering higher wages to new employees with no experience than their current employees. How long before your current employee goes, wait a minute, I'm making less than the new guy?
Yeah, just fire me and hire me back at 20%.
I'm out, right? Like, why won't you pay me that? Can't pay you that. Oh, someone else will, right? So we have that sort of challenge. It was interesting. I was just talking this morning with some folks, and one of the things that has happened in this pandemic is the desperation for jobs actually lend a lot of our blue collar workers to start to apply for entry level white collar jobs that they could be done remotely. Well, we actually lost part of our blue collar workforce to the white collar workforce that maybe otherwise they wouldn't have been considered. But because we have reached this point where we are desperate for workers, lots of people with unexpected experience are finding their way into remote only jobs that are in the white collar workforce. So the workforce itself is changing. It's almost like a great reshuffling and wake up call for a lot of companies around how they treat their employees. Bad managers are making for bad employee experiences, which are making for greater resignations, right? So this whole investment in the employee has to be more holistic than has been done in the past, right? Companies have generally felt like, be grateful, I give you a job and I pay your salary, all these things. Employees don't want that anymore. That's not enough. They want a good employee experience. They want that feeling that they're being paid fairly, that they're being treated fairly, and that they have opportunity. And if companies can't provide that, then they're going to continue to see these very high resignation rates and very low application rates. So it's a two-sided coin, right? Nothing is invisible anymore. It doesn't take long to go to Glassdoor and see that no one wants to work at your company, right? It's just not.
Takes 3 little clicks on Glassdoor and a couple other sites.
I used to call it the magic line at 3, right? If you're below a 3 on Glassdoor, your application rates are significantly lower.
Yeah.
And the power of the typewriter, right? Or of the keyboard, we can just say how good or bad someone is, and it's not that hard to do, and it's easy to do the research.
And there's no little eraser on there.
No.
You can backspace all you want. It's not going away, and it takes a long time to get your rating back up. It will fall a lot faster than it builds back up, right? For every, we kind of guesstimated a couple of years ago that for every one negative interview or negative response, or people that list a whole bunch of pros and cons, and most of them are cons, for every one of those, you need 4 to 5 positive ones to offset that negative one. What you don't want is a candidate experience where they identify with something that's said in that con, either in that department or for that hiring manager especially. That will absolutely torpedo your hiring efforts. So
and as individuals, that these folks have all had experiences at some point, right? They've had good and bad managers already. They already have trigger words. So they're looking at these things and they see those trigger words for them personally. That can be a real challenge to overcome, right? But I think it's even more than that. Talking to candidates out in the market, they're in a very interesting position. If you are talking to them as a employer and they feel like you're being condescending, or they don't have time for you, or you take that interview while you're driving in a car, So you're not really giving the candidate their attention that they deserve, or you haven't actually read their resume ahead of time. You're asking them questions that are already on the resume, right? Candidates are getting smarter and smarter and thinking to themselves, this is how you treat me now. How will this be when I get there? And they're
Yeah.
opting out, right? We're seeing more and more candidates opt out of the funnel versus waiting to be eliminated. Again, back to that bachelor comparison I've been using, right? You don't get to hand out roses and everyone says yes to those roses. Sometimes people say, no, this is not the environment I like.
I don't
And you
like
don't
red
get to know
roses.
why.
I only want white ones. Yeah. And I think that over the last decade or so, I've been in recruiting for 25, 26 years now, right? But definitely over the last decade or so, there's been a widening gap between how much the candidate and the hiring manager have access to each other during that recruiting process. Typically, like when I first started, the hiring manager was intimately involved, right? They wanted to see the candidate slate. They wanted to speak to every candidate, usually 2 or 3 times, but there was only about 2 or 3 people in the recruiting or interviewing process. Now we're seeing 4, 5, 10 interviews for an individual candidate with different people asking different questions, have no idea what the objective of the interview is. There's no outcome. That hiring manager is less and less invested in that candidate's interview. So there are people showing up late or not at all or rescheduling. It's drawing out that interview process. And I think that makes for an absolutely horrible candidate experience. So when they do eventually get hired, now the hiring manager is not as invested. They're not as invested in their onboarding because you've got a full onboarding team. They're not as invested in their training because you've got full training teams now at a lot of companies. So what's the manager there for? Just to delegate activities and responsibilities? I think it needs to be more than that. 25 years ago, your manager was actually your mentor. They were supposed to be the more experienced version that you could hopefully attain someday, right? It was more of a colleague that you would look up to. I don't see that as much now.
In my world, there's a few kinds of managers, but one manager is a coach.
Yeah.
Right. They want to pick who's on their team. They want the best people they can get, but it's not just about individual skills. It's about the team dynamic and how everyone builds each other up, makes them better. And we need a few people involved in that decision, but you're right. It shouldn't be 6 or 12 people interviewing. I talked to a candidate recently who on interview 7, when then they scheduled 8 and 9, said, thank you, but I think we've done enough.
I'm done. Yeah, if you guys can't.
I'm a senior level person, but I'm not that senior. And there are other options.
It shows a bit of dysfunction in the decision-making process within the organization if you can't get past 4 or 5 interviews and make a final decision. It shows the hiring manager doesn't have authority, in my mind.
Or doesn't have an investment in the outcome, right? One of the two. But you're right. Then good managers care about who they hire for their team, not necessarily for the broader organization to make sure everyone likes them and everyone agrees, because you'll never get that, right? No amount of EQ is going to solve this problem. So we need to get focused on hiring good people quickly, right? And that's the second piece, which is, are the people in the business who you do need to be part of the team, one, opening themselves up for those interviews? Are they making themselves available? But also, and this is an important thing from a candidate perspective, are you providing the candidate with the right people to talk to so they can evaluate if they want to work for your business? Right? There's an organization I'm familiar with who found out that most of their female candidates said no because they had an all-male slate of interviewers.
I love this story.
Right?
Tell me that. Give me more details on that story.
It's one of my favorite. I won't say who it is, but it's an organization that had a directive to move. I believe it was from just over 20% female employees to 50% over the course of 10 years. What they found is that the data showed that a lot of the female potential employees they would make offers to would decline. So being an organization of data, they started looking at the data, and what the data showed is there was a direct correlation between no's and all male slates of interviewers. Simple solution: no more all male slates of interviews. Simple, across the board. Doesn't matter who your candidate is. We need to start to reflect to the candidates what our organization should look like and is going to look like. They made that change and immediately saw an uptick in the number of people who are saying yes. Was that the whole solution? Absolutely not. But is that a huge first step? Yes. It was an organization that was smart enough to look internally and say, what's wrong with our process, and not what technology do we need to add, or what new person do we need to hire, and who should we outsource this to? No, they just looked at their own data and said, oh, we are making a grave error. Let's change our process and help our organization get our candidates to say yes, to want to say yes, because candidates are looking for certain things.
To summarize, make the interview panel, if you will, representative of the company that you want to be and the diversity that you want to represent, not what you currently have now, right? So if you have all male executives, you need to figure out a way to get a female on that hiring panel if you're trying to hire female executives, or Blacks or Latino or Asian, doesn't matter. If you're trying to, increase the diversity of your organization, then you need to have that represented in the interview panel, no matter what the representation is.
Yep. And it's, it's sort of like, if you want to change the diversity makeup of your organization, yes, you can change your interview panel. The other option that a lot of companies don't seem to explore is just change the makeup of the candidate slate. If you simply demand that every candidate slate is half diverse, within a couple of years, your organization will be half diverse.
One would think.
The data.
However, I had a client when I was in RPO that we had a directive, hey, a minimum of, at the time, it was minimum of 35% of the candidates must be diverse. In this town, it was about 60-40, 60-40 slated towards the minority in this town. So, heavily on the minority, but 35% was a bare bone minimum that we were to provide. Great, no problem. We had 60% of the overall population. These were more or less a lot of manufacturing positions. They were only hiring about 3%, 3.2% of the candidates were actually minority candidates. So even though 35% of the candidates coming through were minorities or diversity candidates, 3.2% were actually being hired. So we said, okay, what we're going to do is for the next 6 months, a couple hundred jobs, like 500 jobs, we're going to increase the candidate slate from 35% up to 66%, right? And we're going to measure, what the applicant acceptance rate and stuff like that. The number of minority candidates actually dropped at 2.8, I think it was, or 2.6%, which is a huge drop off of a couple hundred hires. So it wasn't, and we doubled the number of minority candidates that were being submitted to this company. So it's not that you could increase, we could increase it to 100%, and it probably would have dropped to 1 or 2% of the diversity hires, right? So it's not always about that. There's some companies that just have a culture of, we are hiring what is already here, and what is already here is X. If you're not X, you're not getting hired here, right?
This is back to your bad leadership, bad management, right? Because those are not all bad candidates. That's just statistically 100%. Impossible.
Yeah.
Right. And so
it doesn't make sense.
If you want to change your organization, yes, I'm sort of being a little bit pedantic and saying change this, change that, but really it's a mental shift.
Yeah.
And if leadership isn't making that change, then the file and rank certainly aren't going to.
So we had to basically say, look, from a RPO perspective, there's nothing really we can do to change your numbers. We could increase this candidate slate to 100% diversity. It's not going to make a difference. What will make a difference, though, is you should go through some diversity, inclusion, and training and hiring, and show the importance to your organization of hiring diversity candidates. So their solution was to hire a diversity hiring manager, a DEI type manager, which, of course they had no support. So they were set up to fail, and it didn't go anywhere. And last I heard, their hiring is still the same. So
and they are probably having a very hard time getting candidates right now.
I don't know. I'm so far removed. This is years and years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. So what do you see on the horizon for 2022?
Think that experience is the word for 2022. It's
So I
like I
named my
said,
podcast correctly. 10x
I
candidate
mean,
experience.
that crystal ball of
Dead
yours is
on.
amazing. But like I said, I think it's more than just the candidate experience. I think it goes hand in hand with the recruiter experience, and we can't sacrifice the recruiter experience for the candidate experience, because I think that might look good on paper, but will fail in practice. So for me, it's all about experience, and that experience can be data driven, it can be process driven, it might have to be both, but it's really about making it easy for candidates to find you, engage with you, raise their hand, and then make it very easy for the right recruiter to get in front of that candidate, get them into the process as quickly as possible, and then bring hiring managers and make them understand that part of this process is not only bringing the candidate through, but keeping the existing employees' experience high, because your turnover is what's going to kill you. Right? It's absolutely, because you're not getting more recruiters. It just means there's more jobs that they have to go find more candidates to put through, which is going to impact the candidate experience, right? This is all together. So experience, the candidate, the recruiter, and the employee.
So I get this question asked a lot. How fast do we really have to move? Is it really realistic to have a recruiter call them within 1 or 2 weeks? I think it is. If not, you're understaffed, right? But I take lessons from other industries. So over the last year and a half, ever since COVID hit, the mortgage industry has been absolutely bonkers, right? Every mortgage loan officer and their mother has been absolutely buried with refinances. Everybody needed a refi because interest rates were going down at a low 2.5% or so, right? So if you look at any of those mortgage companies, the big ones, right? And you'll see them online. You type in mortgage and you'll see 1,000 of them, right? But the big ones, if you were to fill out one of those applications, from the time you click submit until the time your phone rings is approximately 14 seconds.
Yes.
14 seconds. How do I know? Because I tested this, right? So
because you just got a new mortgage.
Yeah, no, I didn't get a new mortgage. I tested it out on Zillow and Quicken and a couple other ones. I was like, how long is it going to take for the boom, 14 seconds. And while I'm on the phone with this mortgage loan officer, how did you do this so quickly? They've got massive call centers. They've been trained. They've been certified. And then it goes to the next guy in or gal on the list. So that while I'm on the phone with this person, my phone is ringing from 15 other companies that are just driving traffic. Because if Zillow doesn't close me, then Quicken Loans salesperson's going to, and then the next one and the next one. I think this, not that it needs to be a hard sell, but I think that recruiting needs to take some lessons from other industries and get answers to that candidate more efficiently and quicker, right? So it may not be through the phone. It might be through a text message or, hey, we saw that you applied, and start answering questions that way.
Yeah.
Through some kind of automation.
I think you're right. There's lots of things to be learned, but one of them, again, is that you're, as an employer, no longer in the driver's seat, right? It would be like a company trying to sell you something thinking that they are in the driver's seat, and they'll tell you when you'll be buying. People move because of, it's just like companies, right? More revenue, stop wasting money, better, more time, right? There's only a few things that make people move. And if you want to get to a candidate with a product that you have to sell, which is a job, it's a pretty unique job for some roles. Some roles, there's a dime a dozen. So you may look at the world differently depending upon which lens you're sitting in. But the reality is there's no job that you have that only one person and one person only will want and can do, right? And so you have choices, but that means so do they. And if they're interested and they give you a hint that they're interested, if you're not responsive, then someone else is. So the experience isn't so much around how nice are you when you finally call, but the fact that you took 2 weeks to call, it's,
they're going to remember it.
They're gonna
I
remember.
mean, one of the biggest issues on the candidate side years ago was, I submit my resume and I went into a black hole. Never heard from anybody again. In other words, they got ghosted. Well, now one of the biggest recruiter complaints that I hear is I had 5 interviews this week set up and not a single candidate, showed up. They didn't call, they didn't show, they didn't cancel, they didn't reschedule. They just no call, no show. Right. So candidate ghosting is a major issue on that side. And I'm
Yep.
like, you know what? Karma's a bitch. It's gonna,
Well, for years, right? Well, the
yeah,
other thing I think is interesting is that we do this thing to recruiters that we would never do to our like professional services teams. Professional services teams have so many projects they can work on at any given time, and anything else goes into a queue and waits. And when something comes out, fresh service, the new one goes in. But that doesn't happen with recruiters. We just look around and say, oh, we got another job. You. So we keep piling more on our recruiting teams. So one of the things that I think could be interesting is to see a company say to their hiring managers, like, look at, this is how many spots we have open right now for jobs. First in, we'll work on yours. If not, you wait.
yeah,
And really get the hiring managers to stop being a passive participant, right? If you're an active participant in the recruiting process, you help your recruiter, you become more invested. They can get through the process faster. The candidates are more invested, and you're more likely to, as a recruiter, to clear that particular job. So you're going to favor those hiring managers. I think there's an interesting thing in there where we haven't looked at the recruiting structure in a way to say, what is a recruiter's capacity, and only ask them to operate at capacity. Instead, we ask them to operate at 130, 150, 200% capacity. And then
yeah.
it takes them 2 weeks to get back to candidates, right? So a lot of this is all, again, back to the recruiter experience.
Hiring managers have almost zero accountability in the recruiting process.
Right, except for the fact that they need this person for their
But
team.
if they miss a meeting, oh well, sorry, I was busy. If they're late to an interview, oh well, sorry, I was busy, I was caught up. Right? I see very few people holding hiring managers accountable for showing up on time, showing up to interviews, prepared, having read the resume.
Not changing the requirements halfway through.
Understand, actually having read the requirements that for the open job that they have on their team. That's a new one, right? Well, it's not new. It happens all the time. So anyway, so 2022, what are some of the trends that you're seeing besides candidate experience?
I think companies are looking at all their technology and trying to figure out what helps and what doesn't help me. I think we've over technologied our businesses. These recruiters, we used to joke about recruiters having so many sources of candidates because they had all these job boards and all of these resume databases. And that's still true. But now they also have text messaging services and chatbot services and automation tools and resume readers and all of these other things. I'm not sure what recruiters, how they even start their day anymore, because there's so many things interacting with all of their things.
Recruiters have so much on their plate. They're expected to be an employer branding expert, a social media expert, a recruitment marketing expert. They have to be a copywriter to rewrite all these horribly written job ads. They need to know how to recruit. They need to know how to sell. They need to know how to do intake meetings with the hiring managers. They need to know how to be a scheduler and write job offers. It is ridiculous the amount
and benchmark
of
salaries and know the intricacies of our insurance
metrics,
plan.
analytics. Oh, and by the way, AI chatbots and everything. It's just ridiculous the amount of time and effort and skill sets that we're piling onto the recruiter's plate, right?
I mean, I think automation is amazing when it works and when it helps, but I do wonder sometimes how much automation we've done in the wrong direction. So we've automated out the important pieces, right? So I think automated schedulers are great because there's no real personalization necessary. I think automated emails have always been a bad thing, right? People don't enjoy the thanks for contacting us. We'll get back to you when we can.
I don't know. 1 is good. 32 is probably not the best, especially if you're just going to send me a job description month, week after week after week. I don't need 32 job descriptions. If I'm a VP of sales and I get 32 job descriptions for business development or SDR manager, it's not relevant, right? That would piss me off.
I think also it's we're starting to see these silos, right, of technology, of groups. I've seen companies now, they have recruitment marketing groups and then recruiting groups, and never shall the twain talk to each other. And their technology stacks have this big gap. So there's this loss in between because no one owns the connected pieces, right? So we're starting to see this, I think you were talking about this before, the Durkheimian division of labor, right? Everybody has their own job, and it's so skinny that no one's actually looking at the thread through it and the experience between the handoffs. So even if every individual interaction is good, if the handoff between them is bad, technology-wise or human-wise, it's not good, right? You haven't actually solved the problem. So the more technology, the more specialization, the more opportunities for failure. And so really having a tight view of what your technology stack should look like and how that impacts the experience, back to my experience word, again, candidate and recruiter, how do we make this tight? How do we make this seamless? How do we not look at these technologies as all individual walled gardens that don't want to work with each other? How do we force them to start to build those bridges and actually make the recruiter and the candidate's lives better, and not just another technology they have to interact with?
Those are all excellent points. All right, Leah Daniels, thank you so much for being on the 10X Candidate Experience Show. Everybody, make it a great one. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Bye-bye.